I see a lot of similarities between you and Jordan Peterson. What are your thoughts on the Jordan Peterson revolution?
I mean, I love Jordan. I know Professor Peterson relatively well at this point, and I think he's doing an awful lot of good. We looked at each other the other day. We were having a conversation on Dave Rubin's show, and we looked at each other and we said, how is it that we found a huge market for saying things like, take responsibility for your own life and tell the truth? Like, how is this a big market proposition? And it just shows the radicalism of society right now, that this is considered an underground subversive thought when you say, you know, make good decisions and maybe you'll have a better life. So the fact that Jordan says that, the fact that I say that, I think that, you know, all credit to Jordan. I think that he's a really interesting thinker. I like his lectures on religion. Our divisions are largely about whether it's a matter of religion being useful or religion being true. But we start from the same fundamental premises about the value of reason in a society that seems to have lost its mind. And so good for Jordan. I mean, that interview with Kathy Newman is everything, right? The interview with him on BBC, which I talked about on my show, is just spectacular because being Kathy Newman is something that everybody on the right has to go through. If you're on the right, the media will take your views, pretend that those are not your views, that instead what you actually believe is something vile, evil, and nasty, and then attribute those views to you in front of you. And Jordan is one of the people who I've sort of deemed the Bartleby group for fans of Melville. There's just a certain group of people who just say no. Right? I'm not going to do that. And Jordan is one of those people. I think there are people on the left, by the way, who are like this. I think Sam Harris is one of those people. You know, somebody who I disagree with strenuously on a lot of topics. But when he was on with Bill Maher and talking about the problems with fundamentalist Islam, and Ben Affleck went after him, he basically said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I think that a society that's so skewed that simply saying no to basic propositions that are false is now popular. It says more about our society than it says about either Jordan or me. We were looking at each other and going, are we the best that society has to offer right now? Are we the best thinkers? Because if so...
A bit about the the boost and the negation of the SAT scores that black applicants may receive with comparison to Asian people or in comparison to white people.
I spoke about Princeton study, correct.
And you also spoke about how there is not an equality of outcome in this nation. So with regard to this...
No, there is inequality of outcome.
Yeah.
There's no inequality of opportunity. Yes.
Yes.
In the sense that there's no government obstacles. They're inequality, just to clarify before you finish the question, I promise, I'll let you finish. When I say there's no inequalities of opportunity, I obviously don't mean that we are all equally situated. I will never be an NBA basketball player. It's never going to happen. Although I could probably make the Lakers roster. They're that bad. But go ahead.
Given that you contend that there is an equality of opportunity in this nation, do you think it is right for the government to pursue, or like for federal cases to say that in some cases policies like affirmative action targeting certain ethnic groups are correct, and doing this, does it acknowledge white privilege, or do we just leave this sort of policies totally out even though there is inequality of outcome?
No. So my answer about affirmative action and government policies that are meant to rectify these inequalities of outcome, no, I'm very much opposed to those. If you have two people who have equal SAT scores, and one of them happens to have had a bad childhood with obstacles to overcome, and one happens to have grown up in a very rich household, then that's an actual factor that has to be taken into account. But if somebody gets an SAT score that's 200 points below somebody else, and the only differentiating factor is their race, that's racism. I mean, I remember a few years back there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about an Asian kid who got like a 1510 on his SATs when it was out of 1600, and he grew up extremely poor, single mother, it was a rough neighborhood, so he had to study in his closet for fear of gunshots and all this stuff, and he applied to Yale, didn't get in, and he didn't get in because he was Asian. If he'd been black, he would have gotten in. I mean, that sort of stuff is just racism pure and simple. I don't understand why Colin Powell's kid is not worse off than that Asian kid was. And we're all differently situated, so let's look at each other as individuals. There's some black people who have it really bad in this country. There's some black people who have it really great in this country. There are a lot of white people who have it really bad in this country. There are more white people on food stamps than black people, by a large margin. There are more white people on welfare than black people by a large margin, which is not to suggest that black people are not on average poorer than white people, because they are. But we're going to be in a much better position to do justice when we stop focusing so much on the perversion that's known as social justice. Social justice stands in direct contravention and opposition to justice. Justice is about you take action, you get what you deserve. Social justice is about you take action, and we may or may not give you what you deserve based on what we think. So first of all, let's start with the notion of white privilege, which has become this buzzword that you hear all the time now, white privilege. is responsible for everything up to and including the Kardashians. It's responsible for everything, white privilege. White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group in the leftist space. It's reverse racism of the highest order. You're basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white. That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism, gang. But you don't have to trust me. Let's go through what other people say the definition of white privilege is. You know, folks on the left, what do they say that white privilege is? Well, here's the definition of white privilege from the Southern Poverty Law Center. There's a book that I'm sure was just a massive bestseller in its day called White Anti-Racist Activism, A Personal Roadmap. And the only person who bought it was the author, Jennifer Holliday's mother. But apparently, her mother works for the Southern Poverty Law Center because here is the definition of white privilege that they quote over at the SPLC. For people who don't know, the SPLC is an extraordinarily far-left organization that pushes the notion that basically anybody who is conservative and on the right side of the aisle must be a member of a hate group. So here is their definition of white privilege. Quote, white skin privilege is not something that white people necessarily do, create, or enjoy on purpose. Unlike the more overt individual and institutional manifestations of racism, white skin privilege is a transparent preference for whiteness that saturates our society. White skin privilege serves several functions. First, it provides white people with perks that we do not earn and that people of color do not enjoy. Second, it creates real advantages for us. White people are immune to a lot of challenges. And finally, white privilege shapes the world in which we live, the way we navigate and interact with one another and with the world. Okay, when my daughter spits up, she's 22 months old. When she spits up, it sounds like this. So let's talk about the perks. Let's talk about the perks that white privilege supposedly confers upon you. So she says, the author here, she says that perks that are conferred upon you by white privilege include things like when you go to the grocery store and you get a Band-Aid, the Band-Aid is your skin tone. Seriously is what she says. Right? For those who live in the real world, this is also called the free market because most of the people in the country happen to have a lighter shade of skin. And if you want to sell more Band-Aids, then you are going to market to the group of people who buy more Band-Aids. But no, this is white skin privilege. Another example she uses is she says that if you go to a hotel, that the hotel shampoo works better with your hair if you're white than if you're black. I don't know how she scientifically tested this, but in any case, this is, again, if this is as far as white skin privilege goes, I can tell you nobody should use hotel shampoo because it's gross. And then she talks about the real advantages that are conferred upon you by white skin privileges. So what are those advantages? And this is where we really get to the meat of the matter. She says those advantages include skin color, quote, not working against me in terms of how people perceive my financial responsibility, style of dress, public speaking skills, or job performance, as well as people not assuming I got where I am professionally because of my race, and store security personnel or law enforcement officers do not harass me, pull me over, or follow me because of my race. So this is the argument, that America is a deeply racist country that is imbued with this white skin privilege, and that if you are black, you can never overcome this white skin privilege because you live in a deeply racist system that has been created by Western civilization, a Western civilization founded on racism, sexism, and bigotry. So, before I want to go through all of these specifics because I think it's important for people to actually assess whether these things are true in the United States at current. And I don't care about, let me put one thing first. I don't care about your feelings. Like, just be perfectly clear, I care nothing about your feelings. I don't want to hear about your feelings. I don't want to hear about your subjective emotions. I don't want to hear about your heart cries out to that. I don't care. You're not my wife. You're not my kid. I don't give a damn. Okay, so that being the case, let's actually talk about what is provable and what is not provable, and what accusations have been leveraged and which ones are actually supportable. Okay, first of all, statistical disparity does not necessarily mean discrimination. This is the first thing you need to know. Okay, anybody who's ever been in a statistics class knows that this is true, right? If they still teach statistics and it's not too much of a microaggression. So statistical disparity does not always mean discrimination. Right, the vast majority of people who play in the NBA are black. Very few of them are 5'9" Jews. Right? That is not because there is some sort of anti-Semitic conspiracy to keep 5'9" Jews out of the National Basketball Association. I mean, I can't complain that I don't play for the Los Angeles Lakers. Right? This is because the reality is that in America, it tends to be, just as a general principle, meritocracy rules. That's true from the NBA to the halls of academia, and it is certainly true on college campuses. Okay, so let's go through some of the accusations that have been made about white skin privilege. So financial responsibility, right? So this particular author, she said that one of the things that works against you if you're black in the United States is how people perceive your financial responsibility. Okay, first thing to say here, capitalism is colorblind. The only color that capitalism cares about is green. Okay, capitalism seriously doesn't care about your color, it doesn't care about your race, it doesn't care about your sexuality. In fact, capitalism is the single best way to overcome racism and sexism and bigotry and homophobia, because if you decide to be any of these things, if you decide to be a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, the guy next door will not, and he will take all of that money from you. You will be outcompeted. This is the beautiful thing about capitalism. Your advantage in the marketplace is catering to as many clients as possible and to hiring the best people possible. But the usual statistics that are thrown out are statistics about, for example, lenders systematically discriminating against qualified black borrowers. The truth is that if banks routinely did this, they would go bankrupt.